This series in the book of Colossians. Okay, this is a letter that Paul wrote to a group of young believers in this fairly new church, and they were being pounded by false teaching. And this false teaching was trying to wiggle its way into the church, and so Paul loved this church. He's never even met them before, but he had a heart for them because he knew the danger of false teaching. And he knew what could happen if that wiggled its way into a church. And so he wrote them a letter, and he said, okay, I'm going to give you some tools that you can use to stand up against false teaching. All right, so we're going to start in chapter 2 today. That's where we're going, Colossians chapter 2. All right, but I'm going to give you the one thing right away before we start. Here it is. The one thing above anything else that I want you to get this morning, it's this. Strong roots stabilize, strengthen, and encourage growth. Strong roots stabilize, strengthen, and encourage growth. I don't know if you know this or not now, but every single one of us in this room, we are establishing roots. Every one of us in this room, we're establishing roots. And depending upon where the roots, what they're getting fed, and how deep they go, determines our next steps in life, determines how stable we are, determines the choices we make. And so Paul, he's going to step into this imagery of these deep roots, okay? So I'm going to actually start in Colossians chapter 1, verse 29, and then go into verses 1 and 2 of chapter 2. Now, okay, here's the thing, okay? When this was originally being written, there were no page numbers. There were no numbers on there for you to figure out where you are. We did that later, so it would make us easier to follow what was being said. Okay, so the reason why I'm going to start with verse 29, this is a continuation of his thought, all right, from the end of chapter 1. Okay, so here we go, verse 29. That's why I work and struggle so hard, depending on Christ's mighty power that works within me. And then Colossians 2:1. I want you to know how much I have agonized for you and for the church of Laodicea, and for many other believers who have never met me personally. I want them to be encouraged and knit together by strong ties of love. I want them to have complete confidence that they understand God's mysterious plan, which is Christ himself. All right, so in these first two verses of chapter 2, Paul's letting us know the heart behind his words. Okay, so have you ever heard somebody and had a conversation with somebody, and you know they're using these words, and on the outside person might go, "Oh man, those seem really harsh." But if you know the heart behind those words, it makes all the difference in the world. Like if you have a good friend and you trust each other, and your friend comes and they speak into your life, some of it might not be easy to hear, but you know that they love you as a friend, it makes all the difference in the world, doesn't it? So Paul is helping us to understand in these first verses, this is the heart behind what I'm going to say. Because he says, you need to understand, I have agonized over you. Have you ever agonized over somebody? I have. I have numerous times. And it's like gut-wrenching. And there's this visceral, emotional response when you're thinking about the other person. And you might be praying for them. But he says, I've struggled and agonized for these people he has never even met. And he says that I've agonized over you. And here's the thing. He's reminding us again. He's not trying to make a name for himself. He's not. He's not trying to be some super apostle. Okay? He's making certain sacrifices so these believers would not only stand against false teaching, but they're going to grow together in their walk with God. That's his intent on why he's saying what he's saying. All right? So, in verse 2, he says that he wants them to be knit together in love. It's the same word that he uses in another letter that he writes. Listen to this. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 16. He says this. He makes the whole body fit together, knit, same words, perfectly. As each part does its own special work, it helps the other parts grow so that the whole body is healthy and growing and full of love. And so he's using this imagery where okay, you need each other. You need to understand this. Like within a church, we need each other. I think sometimes more than we realize. You know, when we decided to come down here and plant this church down here at TNC, little did I know how much I'm going to say this again, how much I was going to need this. Not those that we minister to, not our neighbors, how much I was going to need this. And so Paul, he's given this imagery, right, of where you need to understand, right? You need each other. You need each other. And then he writes that he wants them to have complete confidence in their relationship with Jesus. Okay, I have talked to so many people, and they've been Christ followers for 20 years, some 30 years, and they're still not sure. They're like, I don't know. I'm not really sure. And Paul, over and over and over again, he writes, like he says, no, you don't get this. You can have complete confidence in your relationship with Jesus and your position with God through Jesus. You can have confidence in that. Because see, what these false teachers were doing, they were wiggling their way into the church, putting doubts in their minds that Jesus wasn't enough. It was Jesus plus. And so Paul, he's reminding us about that idea of complete confidence is taken from a couple of these Greek words, totally convinced. Totally convinced. Do you know why you're sitting in a chair right now? Do you know why you're sitting in that chair right now? Because you have been totally convinced that that chair is going to hold you up. You don't even think about it. You're like, it's just going to hold me up. I know, I'm totally convinced that that chair is going to hold me up. In fact, okay, so he's saying, listen. You can be totally convinced that Jesus is the only way to God, and in Him, you're totally forgiven, totally loved, totally adopted, and that you have a future and a hope with Him. Nothing, nobody else, no matter what anybody else says to you, no matter what, no amount of convincing will change your mind. That's what Paul is saying. You can get to that point where there is no question. Well, why do we need this confidence? Why do we need that? That's verse number 3. Listen to what he says. He says, the reason why you can have confidence, it says, in Him lie hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. Okay, so that word hidden in there is actually the word really means treasured. And so we would say, in him are treasured wisdom and understanding. It's a treasure. Like last week when we talked about this treasure, this hidden revelation that the Jews, they thought about, they kind of knew it, they weren't really sure. And then when Jesus comes on the scene, the treasure box is opened and the revelation of who he is, that he's the Messiah, is there. But then there's this other piece to the puzzle where Paul goes, okay, not only that, but you need to understand, like in Jesus, he goes, in Jesus are treasured this wisdom and knowledge. Wisdom and knowledge. James, when he was writing his letter, the brother of Jesus, James said, if you lack wisdom, you can ask God for wisdom, who gives to all people without reproach. If you need wisdom, he says, you ask God, and he'll give you wisdom. And in fact, when you ask wisdom, don't doubt that he's going to give you wisdom. He says, when you ask for wisdom, expect it. Through somebody else, through a text, through something you watch, through a circumstance that happens. If you ask for wisdom, you expect it from God. Okay? And so, Paul, you know what? He's saying, look, you need to understand, okay? No matter what, you can be convinced, all right? All right? It's kind of like a story, okay? Now listen. Okay, so in this village, there's this guy, his name is Elias. And Elias was searching all over the place for wisdom. Like he visited great teachers. He was reading these scrolls, listening to the elders, but no matter how much he learned, he still felt that there was something missing. And he couldn't figure it out. And so one day, as he was sitting in his village, this old traveler guy came to the village and sat beneath this huge tree. So there's this old guy there, and this old guy kept speaking of this hidden treasure. This hidden treasure. One that had all this wisdom and knowledge in it. And so Elias was like, whoa, where can I find this treasure? Where is it? I want to find it. I've been looking for it all over the place. Where is it? And the man smiled and he goes, you don't understand. It's not buried. This treasure isn't buried in the ground, or it's not locked in some chest. No. It's found in a person. His name's Jesus. Okay? And then Elias was like, well, how can wisdom and knowledge be found in a person? How can that happen? And the traveler leaned in and he goes, because Jesus is not just a man, he's the source of all truth. And when you seek him, you're going to find more than answers. You're going to find the one that created them. You're going to find the one that created them, right? And the treasure is not in knowing everything, but in knowing him, right? So Elias, he thought about these words, and he spent years chasing after knowledge, and he had never sought Jesus. And from that day on, he stopped looking at all these scrolls and speeches alone and began to know Christ. He began to get to know Jesus. And as he did, you know what he discovered? Oh my gosh. I am discovering some wisdom and some knowledge about who I am, what my destiny is, how I can interact in the world around me. I'm starting to learn some of this wisdom that Paul is talking about. Okay, because listen to this. I can have confidence in what Jesus says because he created truth. Jesus created truth. So you can trust him. That numerous times Jesus in the New Testament would say, I tell you the truth. I tell you the truth. I tell you the truth. Right? He would say that, all right? And then, okay, so Paul is saying you can have confidence in who you are in Jesus because you can trust Jesus because he's the author of truth. And then he's going to tell us, okay, so now I'm going to tell you why I'm telling you all this. In verse 4, listen. I am telling you this so no one will deceive you with well-crafted arguments. Okay, let's stop right there. No one will deceive you with well-crafted arguments. Okay? You know what Paul's saying? Listen, I'm telling you how you get deceived. This is how it happens. It happens with well-crafted arguments. All right? This has been going on since the beginning of time. Okay? Started all the way back with Adam and Eve. Listen to this. It won't be on the screen. I just want you to listen to this. Okay? Okay, God, he made all the creation. He made a man and a woman. And he gave Adam very clear instructions. You can eat of any tree of the garden except for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You don't. You cannot eat from that. But anything else, it's free game. Right? So him and Eve, they're living a great life. And then this happens. Genesis 3, starting verse 1. The serpent was the shrewdest of the wild animals and the Lord God had made. One day he asked the woman, did God really say you must not eat from any of the trees in the garden? Of course we may eat fruit from the trees of the garden, the woman replied. It's only the fruit from the tree in the middle of the garden that we are not allowed to eat. God said you must not eat it or even touch it. If you do, you will die. And then the serpent goes, Eve, come on, you won't die. Look at all the other fruit you've eaten up here. Nothing's killed. You're not going to die. Right? Verse 5, God knows that your eyes will be open as soon as you eat it. And you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Okay, stop. Okay. This is a classic, well-crafted argument. It is. Because it sounds true. Right? But, okay, here's the truth. He said, oh, you won't die. Yeah. Here's the truth. Once they ate that, God knew that they were going to experience spiritual death and separation. In that second, they were going to experience spiritual death and separation. And they were also going to experience physical death. Because, see, up until that time, there was another tree there that they would eat from that would just keep them going and keep them eating. And they would live forever and ever and ever. And the truth is, after this happened, God said, you can't go in the garden anymore. In fact, he put angels there with swords to keep them from going back in. Okay? And then, here's the other thing that happened as a result of that. They replaced God's definition for good for their own. I would call that death. Okay? Well-crafted argument. Okay. All right, so let's just fast forward 12,000 years. Okay? Well-crafted arguments. Here we go. Let's go to that next one up there, Kelly. Okay? This is 12,000 years before Jesus came on the scene. Okay, so the Greeks deceived the city of Troy, convinced them that they had left the region, and in good faith, they made this giant wooden horse for their gods. Okay? Little did they know that Greek soldiers were hiding inside the horse to take over the whole city of Troy. And you know what they did? They appealed to their pride and their deep religious beliefs. Okay? All right, let's fast forward to World War II. Okay? The Nazi war machine convinced millions of Germans through media that Jews were disposable and that the war was justified and they deserved total control. Well-crafted arguments. All right? Let's fast forward to the 20th century. When the tobacco industry, listen to this, they funded scientific research, right, that denied or downplayed the dangers of smoking, and they used these highly persuasive arguments claiming there's no proven link between smoking and lung cancer. That's what they did. Okay, let's fast forward to 2008. Here we go. Banks and financial institutions convinced people to take out risky subprime mortgages, claiming that the housing market would never collapse. Whoops. Well-crafted arguments. And Paul's saying, look, that's how it happens. Have there been any well-crafted arguments like over the last year that you might have noticed? Maybe in this election year, maybe. Just a few here and there, right? Yeah, well-crafted arguments, all right? So he says, look, this is how you are deceived. Okay, now we're going to get to verse 5. Listen. For though I am far away from you, my heart is with you. And I rejoice that you are living as you should, and that your faith in Christ is strong. And now, just as you accepted Christ Jesus as your Lord, you must continue to follow him. Okay, so that's a picture of, let's just say that you decide, I'm going to put my faith in Jesus. That's like stepping onto a path. And so you step onto this path, and you're walking on this path, but then you hear some other stuff and you hear this other teaching or whatever, and then all of a sudden you start straying off the path, right? You just kind of stray off the path, right? Here's the thing. Like, once you get on the path, okay, if you stop walking or you deviate, right? You stop walking or you deviate, you're not going to reach your destination. It's not rocket science, right? And Paul is saying, you know what? Our relationship with Jesus is like stepping on this road, this right path, but not just stepping into it isn't enough. We have to keep walking. You have to keep walking. You can't just stay there. I've talked with people that have been Christ followers for 30 years, and it's like they've been cemented to the path, and they haven't moved for like 30 years. And it's like, no, Paul is saying, no. When you put your faith in Christ and you step on that path, you keep walking. You keep trusting. You keep following where he leads you, right? Because Jesus, he knows the way you should go, and if you stay close to him, he's going to guide you safely home. I don't know how long Bill has. They're saying maybe 6 weeks. Maybe 6 weeks. And I know Bill. And I've seen Bill over the last quite a few years. And Bill he's tried to stay on that path. I don't know how many different Bible studies he's gone to. I don't know how many different churches he goes to. But he's trying to stay on that path, right? Keep moving forward. And I'm telling you, Jesus is going to lead him home. He will. I have no doubt. He's going to lead him home, okay? And then Paul brings it home by stating the key, here's a tool, to stand strong against false teaching and keep moving forward. Here it is, verse 7. This is all leading up to this. Let your roots grow down into him, and let your lives be built on him. Then your faith will grow strong in the truth you were taught, and you will overflow with thankfulness. Okay, there's a little story in your card there called The Leaning Tree. And the leaning tree is basically this picture of what happens when your roots aren't deep. When your roots aren't deep. says Mr. Taylor's front yard stood a beautiful tree, lush, green, full of fragrant blossoms, but it had one flaw. It leaned. And every strong wind that went through and every gust that went through, no matter how many stakes he put in it, it just leaned. And pretty soon it was just the leaning tree in the neighborhood. Everybody drove past it because it was always leaning. I have one of those. I saw one of those on my walk. Every single morning, I see this pine tree, and I'm not kidding you. It's growing like this, and it's not a small pine tree. It's a bigger tree, right? It says one day, after another storm of it tilting like an alarming angle, his neighbor, Mr. Hendricks, chuckled from across the fence. He says, "That tree of yours is top-heavy," he said. "All show and no roots." If it had dug deep before growing tall, the wind wouldn't shake it so easily. And that night, Mr. Taylor sat on his porch thinking, how often do people grow fast in their faith but neglect their roots? Because I've had people do that before. You know what? They'll come here, to a service, and they'll like our service, and they'll come here a couple times. Then all of a sudden they're like, oh, what can I do? Can I get involved in this? Can I do that? What do you want me to do? Help me to sign up. I want to do this. I want to do that. And oftentimes I'll go, you know what? How about this? How about you come and hang out with us for a while? How about you just come and hang with us for a little bit? You can get to know us. We can get to know you. You can have God do some work in your life. And he's saying, roots are important. We're in such a hurry. We are in such a hurry. And you know what? I'm at the age now where I'm like, I don't think God's in that big of a hurry. He's more concerned about you and what's going on with you and the work that he's doing inside of you. Because here's the thing. Like, we can present ourselves more mature than we really are. You know what? You hang around people, church people, long enough, you'll learn their lingo. You'll learn Christianese. Okay? You'll learn their dress codes. You'll learn how they pray. You'll learn how to sing their songs. But soon, after you do that enough, you'll just present yourself as one of them. But this is what Paul is saying. If you don't have a solid foundation, if your life is built on them and not on Jesus, when things get tough, you're going to lean and possibly crash over. Okay? Do you know who Paul learned this lesson from? Jesus. He learned it from Jesus. In fact, listen to what Jesus said. Luke chapter 6, starting in verse 47. He said this: I will show you what it's like when someone comes to me, listens to my teaching, and then follows it. It's like a person building a house who digs deep and lays the foundation on solid rock. When the flood waters rise and break against the house, it stands firm because it's well built. But anyone who hears and doesn't obey is like a person who builds a house without a foundation. When the floods sweep down against the house, it will collapse into a heap of ruins. Okay, so there's a couple things here. Like when you read a verse like this, there's a couple things you need to ask yourself. There's always detective questions, right? Jesus is saying that our deep roots come from obedience to his teaching. And when our foundation is in Jesus and we decide to obey him, it's like adding rebar to concrete. When you add rebar to concrete, it doubles the strength of concrete. Okay? And Jesus is giving us two scenarios. Two scenarios. It's the word, he uses the word when in both scenarios. Not if, when. Okay? In both scenarios, floodwaters came and broke against the house. That means the storms of life come to those who obey Jesus and those who do not. Okay? We're both going to experience that. All right? We're both going to experience. But Jesus goes, there are two clear results here. I love, Jesus is so simple in what he says. Okay? First scenario, okay? Listen to Jesus' teachings and obey, stand firm. Listen to Jesus' teachings and not obey, collapse. Listen to Jesus' teachings, obey, stand firm. Listen to Jesus' teachings, not obey, collapse. Because see, here's the thing. So, Jesus is saying, look, you're both going to feel, but both of these people, they're going to feel the hit of the storm. They're both going to feel the wind from the storm. They're both going to get soaked from the storm. But the one who chooses to obey, they're going to stand firm until the storm's over, right? They're going to have less pieces to pick up at the end of the storm. Are they going to have some pieces? Oh, yeah, absolutely they will. Right? But okay, so it's like, my cousin, they live in Florida, and when the hurricane came a couple years ago and hit Fort Myers, it just completely wiped out their house, just obliterated it, completely obliterated it, and a lot of other people's houses. Now imagine how they would have felt if they knew it obliterated everybody's house, and then the storm's gone, and they're going, yeah, let's go assess the damage. And they go to assess the damage, and because they had put their house up on this huge foundation, right, with stainless steel or whatever stuff in there, whatever, they go back to their house and they go, oh my gosh, our house is the only one standing? That's not what happened, but imagine what they would feel if that took place, right? That's that whole thing. See, now Paul's bringing it back home again, right? Just like I said, the reason why you're sitting in that chair is because you are totally convinced that it's going to hold you up. And Paul is saying, if you put your faith in who Jesus is and his words, and you choose to obey him, you can have complete confidence that no matter what storm of life you face, he's going to hold you firm. You're going to stand firm. You're not going to collapse into a pile and go, oh my gosh, I'm totally lost. He's saying, no. You're going to stand firm. Don't let anybody convince you otherwise. Because Paul is saying, you can trust Jesus. He invented truth. And then the last thing, he says, okay, you know what, people with these solid foundations, guess what? It makes them thankful. It creates thankfulness. Because I'm telling you what, I've gone through some stuff in my life where I felt like I was about ready to collapse. I mean, I was, oh boy. And then all of a sudden I reconnected with who Jesus is and what his promises are, and that he can hold us up, and he is there for us, and that he has my back, and that he's for me, he's not against me. And then all of a sudden, you know what? I all of a sudden stood firm in the middle of that. And that's what he wants for you. That's what he wants for you. All right, let's stand. Let's sing this last song together, and then I'll close this, okay?